Thank you, sir.
Shelley, so impressive that you're CEO of a bank and your whole journey. She said she had been with the bank, came on expecting to transition into that role. And it's such a big role, having a husband in banking and have heard about banking for 35 years. But in this family-owned business, what are the key advantages and disadvantages of leading a family business when it's not your family?
Not your family. All right. Good question. All right, now I have to figure. How's that? Okay,
Yeah,
good,
great.
good. Thanks. Well, I do think as someone in a family business, it is probably the greatest privilege you can imagine. What I love about family businesses, I came from large corporations. And so for me to be in a business that is really always focused on doing the right thing and focused on a longer term outcome, it is just really rewarding and refreshing. I think there are days, right now the market's helping with this, but when the market's going up, that having stock options and equity would help, in recruiting. But it's really, I think, a privilege to work for a family-owned business for the right people. I'm not sure that everyone would, it's right for everybody, but at least for me, it's been the pinnacle of my career.
Awesome. And I feel the same way at Antis, because there's a heart that goes in, because it started with a heart, right? Now, there's some disadvantages maybe from time to time, like we're not part of the family dynamic.
Right.
We're not at the Thanksgiving dinner necessarily. Mm-hmm. But what else comes to mind? Is there a disadvantage at all?
I do think when I'm recruiting and when I'm talking to our team, every once in a while I'll get somebody in and they'll say, oh, I just want to break from all this short-term pressure. And the reality is building a long-term, sustainable, viable company is so much harder than short-term quick fixes. And so I always laugh when you have people who are like, oh, I think it'd just be a real break to be in a place where I don't have to have the analysts every quarter. And it is, because you can do the right thing, but it's a higher standard when you're trying to build a business for the long term. And you've done that with Antis and...
Well, only for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And so that's the interesting part. It pre-existed me for 30, and I feel like, and maybe you would feel similarly coming in 8 years ago, you're kind of picking up the baton and doing kind of that next phase of what it's meant to be.
Right, which is kind of the fun. And I know at Antis you do so much that's beyond roofing, right?
That's how I started.
Yeah, right.
Was all his charitable giving.
Right.
And gradually, of course, the business elements crept into the job, and
there
now,
they are.
That's right. Now I'm bossing Charles around every day.
Does he know it, or are you?
He knows it, right, girls?
Yeah.
I have a whole table over there and lots of people know him. So it's been a lot of fun. Okay, so what are some lessons that you've learned that stand out from family ownership?
So one of the things that I value the most, when I was at a large public company, the executive team would go away to some resort and we'd think about, what are the values for the company? What do you want the values to be? And we'd have McKinsey or Bain would be there, and we'd go through all these exercises, and we'd emerge with the card, right? How many of you guys have had the card, right? Because these are our values because they're on the card, right? One of the things that I've learned is that at a family business, the values come from the family. They come from the kitchen table. They come from how a family chooses to live and make their mark. And that's really been a fun learning. And I think back of all the times that I was so proud of my card and think really wasn't quite as genuine as maybe it should have been.
Well, and I would agree with that, because there's a joy that comes from someone and a family owner that has a heart for their employees. I think that's where you see it first. Mm-hmm. And you get the gift of always being able to do the right thing by those people. And it can be little things, and it can be sometimes some very big things, but they're willing. It's not a corporate environment that you have to run it up 20 chains to get an approval, right?
Right.
And I think employees at all levels feel that.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the goal.
That's
right?
the goal.
Yeah.
So what unique experience and talents do you think you specifically bring to the bank that make you stand out as a leader in that family business?
So I always say on my good days, the family talks about professional management. Don't want to talk about the bad days, but on the good days, I think part of what I bring is just large bank experience. And a lot of what has to happen is building infrastructure and building organizations. And that's what I love to do, is to set a strategy and then build the team. And much like you talk about loving that kind of that organizational piece of it. So that's been good.
Well, and in your role, you have to have deep technical experience, all that prior banking experience, because there is so much compliance that's a requirement. So how many years did you spend in banking before you got to be the CEO? Because it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. So we're not going there.
Okay. More than 10.
Yeah, more than 10. More than 10, I'm just saying. So, yeah, I used to welcome our trainees every year, and I'd say, I've been at the bank X number of years. And then all of a sudden, one day I was looking out at our trainees, and I realized I had been at the bank longer than they had been alive.
Yeah.
And so we're going with a long time. How's that?
It is hard to be the oldest person in the room, which I am at Antis now. How did that happen?
Yes, but my entire career has been in banking.
Well, and you mentioned you're a mother and you've got a daughter, and I have 4 sons, and I think I am a better leader having had the parenting of those children. And certainly in the roofing industry, which is 2/3 men, understanding that male brain and how it ticks and doesn't tick makes me a little more relaxed about things, right? Like, I don't have a name tag tonight, and I bet they put Charles in charge and not Corey in making my name tag, so we don't have it. So we just know how to compliment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So how does your vision for the future for this business align or possibly differ from the family ownership? Let me stop there.
Yeah. So I do think it's important if you're a family business thinking about hiring from outside, or you're somebody from outside thinking about joining a family business, don't do it unless your visions align. So it is not about coming in to restate the purpose of the family business. I think it's just critically important that your visions align and that you're not fighting it. Now, how you get there is where the debate and the energy and the fun comes in, right? But if you're not in line with the values and the vision, I don't think it's the right company.
I would agree. And we have some personal experience with that, where there was a mismatch, wonderful people, but how that didn't happen early on in the relationship is a mystery. But as I stepped in, I first understood what he wanted, and we talk about it every day, actually. Right. All the time, because what he wants and he wants for his nephew Aaron and what he wants us to be in 10 or 20 years, I need to mirror that. That's my job, to implement. Yeah. Not that I don't have my own opinions, which I do.
But I think that's all in how it gets done, right?
Yes.
And the blocks and things. But I do think alignment matters a great deal. And I don't think, for great big egos and people have to have it their way, I don't know that this is the right role. I think you find a company that aligns with your values and visions, and you can make a tremendous impact.
I agree. So let's go back. You don't have to date yourself, but what mentors have you had?
You asked me that. Yeah. What kind of friend are you?
What mentors have you had in your career that led you to this point?
So I've thought a lot about this because I think all of us are involved deeply in mentoring. And, you know, there are sponsors and advocates, there are cheerleaders in your career, but the most precious gift in my mind is a mentor. And to me, a mentor is somebody who always has your best interest at heart, but is willing to tell you the things you don't want to hear. So that's a really big role. And if you find a mentor who's willing to do that, I would encourage you to nourish that relationship and cherish it, even though every day you don't love it, right? So even though, like, sometimes I can think back when we were acquired, I was at a bank in Louisville, Kentucky, and we were acquired by a bank in Cleveland. And we were really sure that we were way smarter than this bank in Cleveland was, and we just couldn't believe they had bought us, and we didn't want to be part of it. I was invited to move to Cleveland right away, and I went to my mentor and said, "This is just awful. You know, I don't want to live in Cleveland, Ohio. This is just awful." And he said, "No, put on your big boy pants. If you want to grow, you move. And if you don't, you don't. But don't stay here stuck in your ways and then wonder why your career doesn't develop." And it was so hard because I was going for love, you know. I was going to be, you know, babied, and it was tough, but best advice I've ever been given. So.
Awesome. That's a great example. And when I looked at this question, you know, my first 6 years of work life, high school, college, were at Disneyland. And yeah, it was fun. And there was a woman there, like one of the first women ever, first women directors, first women VPs. And she took an interest in me and similarly did a lot of those tough messages. And I was so young, but I believed every one of them. And she was right as things played out. Donna Ross, if she's still around, if you know her. I've always, that was the beginning. And because of that first experience with that person, I naturally sought out other people as my life progressed, my work life, my personal life, because I knew what it looked like.
Yeah. Yeah, once you experience it, it's really valuable. But if you don't, then you tend to look for people who are like, you can do this and you can support it. But boy, that honest feedback is really critical.
It sure is. So there are lots of women in this room. What advice would you give them tonight about leading a business in which they don't personally have any ownership?
So a couple things. We've talked about values and vision aligning, and I think that's very important. I do think it's important to define the guardrails. So every family business is different, and what that family business wants to control and own may be very specific to that business. So I was recently with a friend who owns a business, and he said, our family wants to hold all the real estate decisions with us. I think it's just, and that's great, right? But you need to define that and get real clear about what your role is in the company and what the family is doing. I also think it's important that you get up every day to add value, that it's not about you or not the spokesperson for the family. You're there to really bring value in alignment with the family, but you need to be there to add value. So I define the guardrails, I find the roles that are in alignment, and then I get up every day to add value.
Wonderful. And so a good segue, again, advice for owners of family-owned businesses here tonight that might have 9 non-family owners in key positions, or maybe they're considering bringing in people from the outside. What would you advise them to do as they're either communicating with those people or searching for those people?
Yeah. So I think, again, defining the guardrails, defining what the role is and being really clear about it is very important. And it's not something that comes naturally, right? Because people make decisions and so you have to really sit down and think about it. I think that would be really the the first thing. I think it's important that the owner and the leader that they hire are in alignment publicly. So even, even if they're private conversations, you want that alignment between the family and the management team that you've brought in. So I think that matters a great deal. And the other thing I'd say is that for those companies where there's a board of directors, a family, and then a non-family member, be really clear with your board about what role you expect from the non-family CEO. So there's no confusion at the board level.
And I would say to that point, culture, your culture fit is probably primary. Whether or not you're a fit that way with the rhythms and dynamics of the interpersonal relationships. I had the benefit of already having been at Antis a few years before I stepped into a bigger role, so I knew the people. But if you're coming in from the outside and you're kind of interviewing, take your time. Go to breakfast, go to dinner, have a glass of wine, meet the wife, because there's such overlap into who you are as an individual. It's not the same kind of distance that you might get in a big corporate environment, right? Where work is work and off work is off work.
Oh, I think that's great advice. And get to know the whole family, right?
Yes.
Because every family member matters. So.
They sure do. Yeah. And as Dawn, Charles' wife, she called Corey and I the other night at his birthday party, her sister wives. And I'm like, yes, it takes a whole village to manage him. And we all get along beautifully, right? Don't we?
As long as he does what you want, right? You get along perfectly.
Well, that's not hard to achieve, though, if you know what you're doing. Of course he does what we want. So remember, and before I had a husband and 4 sons, I had 4 younger brothers. So I'd had a lot of practice before I got here. I know. All right. What lessons did you learn, perhaps from a mistake, in your career that have made you more successful today?
So let's see. I think in terms of mistakes I've made, probably it's been really not, there's a saying that every decision is a choice. And sometimes I think I forgot that every decision was a choice and I just let it happen. And then there'd be consequences and then I'd fret over the consequences. So one of the things that I try to do very differently is think through fully. No action is without both positive and negative consequences, right? Or at least most have them. And try to think through all of it and then be ready, ready for both the bad and the good. I tended to charge forward without really thinking about what the negative consequences might be. And so over time, I've tried to get better at that.
And that's a good one, because if you're successful, you probably are a take charge person, and you have to make decisions. Yeah. So I would say for me, to seek to understand, I've really worked on not judging a situation or a person and asking questions. An example, a few weeks ago, a guy, a really good employee, many years with us, twice in 1 week, never has had any kind of issue before the ladder fell off his truck. That's a really big deal on the freeway. And my first question was, to the safety manager, what's going on with him? This is so out of pattern. There is something else on his mind that he's forgetting to tie this down. Try to find out what it is. And, it's not a punishment, but what do you need? Right? Yeah. To get your head back in the game, and it's to be safe for you and for the partner that was with him.
Yeah, and great advice, particularly post-pandemic, because there just seems to be so many more stressors out there than there were.
There sure are. So I'm so happy to see that there are a lot of young women, younger than us, in the audience.
An undisclosed age, we're just going with that.
But what advice do you have to possibly help them to succeed in their careers, whether it's in a male-dominated industry or not?
Yeah. So one of the things, you always write the letter to your younger self, and mine started with, don't wear those really high heels no matter how great you thought they were. But
That is a good one.
Yeah,
Don't ruin your feet.
Yeah. But beyond that, so going a little bit beyond that, a couple of things. One is I feel really strongly that building your support system matters. I think for young women, particularly high achieving young women, there's a tendency to think you can do it all and you can go home after you work all day and clean the house and it's just, there are years when I honestly think I paid more for my support system than I made, so I think I was a negative cash flow, but in the long run it mattered, right? So I do, every young woman I talk with, I really encourage them to build the support system they need to be successful. The other thing is, I think to make career decisions early in their life that get them in the path they want. So once you start down a path, it starts to label you, and so really be thoughtful about what you want that path to look like. And then finally, we talked about it, but I think having mentors shapes everybody's career. And so those relationships take investment and nourishment to work, and really encourage people to have time to do that. And then finally, work where you have passion. Great things happen when there's passion, and that's what you want every day. So be in roles where you feel that passion.
That is wonderful advice. And this is where we end.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Shelley.
everybody. Thank you.